Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to each of you for your service. Thank you for being here. I want to talk about the topic of big tech censorship, which is a difficult topic. I believe it is an incredibly important topic. We have been seeing in recent years and recent months and even recent weeks growing assertions of power from big tech to censor, to shadow ban, to silence views with which they disagree. Just within the last 2 weeks, we saw Google, at the behest of a foreign advocacy group, threaten to, quote, demonetize The Federalist, a conservative online journalistic outlet. The Federalist was told the reason they faced the threat of being demonetized was because of objectionable comments in their comments section. So nothing that actually anyone at the Federalist had written, but rather third-party users had put some, as far as I know, unidentified comments that Google found objectionable. That policy is not a policy Google applies uniformly. Indeed, a quick search can show dozens of progressive journalistic outlets that have comment sections, that have all sorts of nasty things being said, that are not facing the threat of demonetization. And indeed, one doesn't need to look as far as a third-party site. YouTube, which is wholly owned by Google, any one of us can go on to YouTube comments right now and read a host of profane and racist and otherwise offensive comments on YouTube's platform. Yet Google was not applying that standard to its own wholly owned and highly profitable subsidiary, but was instead applying it to the Federalist to force them to demonetize. Now, the Federalist ended up just pulling its comment section down because Google's power is such that challenging the Star Chamber is almost impossible. Yesterday, we saw Twitter decide to censor and block a tweet from the President of the United States that said that an autonomous zone, a lawless autonomous zone, will not be allowed to be created in Washington, D.C., and if anyone attempts to do so, law enforcement will stop them. Google deemed the president pledging to protect public safety and stop the creation of a lawless zone in our nation's capital. Twitter deemed that abusive and so put a content block on it. Something else that complicates this challenge is there's an utter lack of transparency. If one asks, and I have asked representatives from Google, from Facebook, from Twitter, from YouTube over and over and over again, how many posts are you blocking? How many posts are you throttling? Are you just reducing the number of people who see them? They won't answer them. There are zero data that exists about comparative blocking, in other words, bias. I've asked the questions, very simple questions. We have two major political parties. I've asked each of them the question, how many posts from Republican candidates for office have you blocked? How many posts from Democratic candidates from office have you blocked? We do know, for example, Twitter blocked my colleague, Senator Blackburn's launch video for Senate. So she's a sitting candidate, or sitting member of the House running for Senate, and Twitter deemed her launch video unacceptable and blocked it. They refuse to answer these questions. They then respond, well, there are no data showing our bias because the only source of the data is the black box of their internal files. No one else has that information but Google and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So much like the individual who kills his parents and then pleads mercy of the court because he's an orphan, the absence of data is their direct creation because they refuse to answer these questions. The FCC has recently been brought directly into this issue with an executive order from the president. I understand from comments earlier that at least some of you have concerns as to the extent of legal authority to address this. This is a topic I've been deeply engaged in a long time, and I will readily admit solving it is complicated. Part of the reason solving it is complicated is because it cuts across so many jurisdictional lines that it doesn't fit neatly into one silo. It doesn't fit neatly into into FCC or FTC or DOJ or antitrust or civil division or consumer protection. It cuts across all of those lines. And so I think our federal government is straining to figure out how to address this. I want to start with just a question to each of you. Do you agree that it is a problem that a handful of Silicon Valley billionaires have unfettered power to silence speech with which they disagree, with no transparency and no accountability whatsoever for those decisions?
Yes.
Well, Senator, what I want to start with is what I agree with you with, the absolute lack of transparency, and also that social media is frustrating. But I think when it comes to the First Amendment, it's there to protect all forms of media from government, not to protect government from all forms of media. I think the executive order has it backwards, but I would understand and support efforts of you, this committee, and Congress to try to revisit this law. But as you said, it is complicated.
Yes, I believe the transparency is horrible, and their positions and how they've treated different groups, specifically conservatives, has been absolutely horrible.
The Prodigy and CompuServe messaging boards of the day, when Congress passed Section 230, have long since shed their swaddling cloths. They are now corporate behemoths. Twitter, Google, Facebook. They have more power, more control over more speech than any other institution we've ever known in history. This immense concentration of power and the application of it in an arbitrary way is something that those of us in government can't look at and sit on our hands and do nothing. I think that's why you're seeing bipartisan consensus from Senator Blumenthal in the Earn It Act to some words from FTC Commissioner Wilson to take action. I think the status quo is no longer going to hold. I don't think it can hold. I think we have a responsibility at the FCC to take a look at updating Section 230. I think the Federal Trade Commission needs to look at some of the unfair, deceptive business practices, and Attorney General Barr needs to look at some of the competition and antitrust issues at issue.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I do agree that this is a cross-sectional issue, that there are a lot of complications and a lot of heavy issues. What I would focus on is the First Amendment, which I do think prohibits the government from focusing on the speech of these companies. But what I would also really, what I'd like to fixate on here is that what we really need to do in order to make sure that this does not cloud our elections, I have encouraged NTIA to bring the executive order to the FCC as quickly as possible so that we can have a vote amongst us. I, again, do not think that there's legal authority. I'm happy to engage with that with my colleagues, but so that this does not overhang throughout our elections and have a dark cloud over online speech is something that I'm interested in making sure we do as quickly as practicable.
So my time has expired. Let me make a very quick observation, which is I look forward to working with each of you on this, and Commissioner Rosenworcel's observation about the need for transparency. If the FCC were able to do one thing and simply provide real transparency so the American people can see how many people are being silenced, how many people are being shadow banned, who and what the relative ratios are, that would transform the ability to address this problem. And so transparency would be a very valuable thing to focus on. Thank you, Mr.